You're listening to the DC Real Estate Podcast, the podcast where we focus exclusively on all things local to the DMV area. Local investors, local knowledge, local experts. Our journey starts now.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the DC Real Estate Podcast. My name is Russell Brazil. I'm an associate real estate broker with Arlo Real Estate.
I'm Jack Seiden, owner of DMV Flippers.
And I'm Ron Gallagher. I'm a landlord. People don't use the term landlord though, right? Like if you ever...
It seems to be a little politically incorrect these days, right?
It's definitely going to be canceled. Yeah. In like 5 years, people won't be using the term landlord.
What's the new term?
I don't know. Everyone, if you go to any meetup, and you listen to everyone in the room introduce themselves, no one will use the term landlord.
Really?
I like the
They
term
all say I'm a real estate investor.
I'm a buy and hold real estate investor. They won't say landlord. But everyone's doing landlording. You know, you're all landlord.
How about just like friendly guy who gives you room in exchange for money? Or is that too long?
I like the term landlord, so I'll say it with pride. I like it. I like being the lord of the land. It's got alliteration. It's got a little blasphemy in there. It's got everything you would want in a phrase.
And let's be honest, we're trying to keep the common man down, right? So we want to be
That's
lords.
right. That's right. I love Lord of the Land. What an awesome thing to aspire to be. So I'm a landlord.
This show is now being canceled on episode 3. Mm-hmm.
Hey, so anyways, we got a few listener questions from Instagram and from email. If you have any future questions, email us at info@dcrealestatepodcast.com or reach out to me on Instagram. But so let's go through a few of these questions before we get in the Ron story. So the first question we had was from Sam up in Baltimore. He's a real estate agent. He asked, "How are you such a young king?" I don't know exactly what he means by that.
Well, it might have to do with the landlording. Is that like...
Well, I think it's that people think I'm a little bit younger than I am. You're
actually
middle-aged.
84 years old.
Yeah, 84 years old. I look really good for my age. But I did start sort of young in my journey to financial independence. In my mid-20s, I did have sort of this epiphany. I had credit card debt, student loan debt, and I sort of had this epiphany that I didn't have to have this debt. And so I worked really hard to pay it off. And once I paid it off, I started investing every single dime I had. So starting early certainly helped down this road.
Yeah, I started when I was 20 and I'm now 26. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think a lot of it, like you get all this advice, and I want to be clear, it's not that you should take undue risks, but a lot of it is just kind of, we talk about this all the time, Russell. And again, you got to make calculated risks, but it's kind of, you just got to kind of do it and learn, right? I mean, you know, we talk about this, the first few flips you did flipping, right? You make
the first few ones
you lose some.
Yeah, my first few, I lost money, progressively lost less money on each one. Luckily, I was young and stupid enough to not care that I was losing money.
And again, it depends on obviously the level. If you're losing a little bit, you know, that's one thing. Don't risk your life savings. But yeah, I mean, I had the same thing. We'd make money every other house.
But you know, when you're 22, 25 years old, your life savings is not that much.
Right.
It seems like a lot at the time, but it really isn't.
And I just think the other advice I'd give is just a lot of it in life is just kind of, and again, within reason, just kind of trying things, taking risks. You know, even like this podcast, I had no idea whether it is or would go well, but you know, we're doing it, we're trying it out. A lot of it is just kind of having the confidence to do and try different things, I think.
Yeah, when you're young, I mean, you have to have a place to live, right? No matter how old you are. So you might as well just buy yourself a little condo or a small starter house or whatever. And
the sooner you can buy that property, the younger you are, the quicker you're going to be able to build equity in it.
I will say it's probably a little bit easier when you were doing this than it is now with the prices where they're at.
Well, I don't know. When I started, hard money was 4 to 5 points and 15%.
No, I mean for primary residence.
Right, but there's still condos, there's still starter homes, there's always something.
So we get another question, and it was...
Wait, you didn't answer the question. Why are you such a young king? You have to answer the question.
Well, I answered it. I started paying off my debt early and saving and investing.
But he's also 84, so he's not that young. So he's not really
so
that
not
young.
really that young.
That's true.
So you started in the Great Depression? What era?
Yeah, it was 1927.
That was probably, well, that explains how you made your money.
So the next question we had was, what neighborhoods do we think will be the best for appreciation over the next decade? I have some very specific, strong feelings about this, that I feel that part of the city we're really going to see a lot of appreciation in is sort of the northern parts of Northwest, 16th Street Heights, Brightwood, Tacoma, Riggs Park. That whole sort of stretch in the city, I think, is, going to be very strong over the next decade.
So I mostly agree with that. So I think the thing about DC in particular, a lot of cities probably, it's not actually like a guess. It's pretty easy to see gentrification patterns. And right now we're gentrifying among, I would say, three main kind of roads, right? You have Georgia Avenue. Probably right now, I would say the gentrification is really hitting like Brightwood. I think, the gentrification for the next 5-6 years is going to actually start to go out into these more suburban areas. So I think Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring, Wheaton, Glenmont, Forest Glen, that kind of, southern Montgomery County. I think that's possibly going to be the most appreciated neighborhood or area over the next 4 or 5 years. You see the same thing, Route 50 and Route 1 in Prince George's County as you exit, Riggs Park, Brentwood. So Cheverly, New Carrollton, those areas around 50, Mount Rainier, Hyattsville, Riverdale, College Park around Route 1. I think those three main roads, Georgia Avenue, Route 1, Route 50, are going to be the biggest appreciation.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And I own rentals along the Georgia Ave corridor, and one of Ron's rentals is right along the Route 1 corridor too. So like we all own properties in these areas we're talking about. So, kind of putting our money where our mouths are on that.
Yeah.
If you're talking about DC specific neighborhoods, I agree with you, Russell, that it's those non-metro accessible parts of Northwest that are east of Rock Creek Parkway and Rock Creek Park, because I think the pandemic and services like Uber and things like that are really minimizing, you don't need to live by a metro stop anymore.
I agree. Uber certainly opened up part of the city to younger people that wouldn't have been the case 5-10 years ago.
Right. So I think in 5 years, Metro is constantly reducing fares, begging people to come and, ride the subway, buses are free. So, I just think that there's going to be less of an importance. Like during the pandemic, if people aren't commuting to work, why would you have to live? Why was living by the metro important before? Well, okay, it was convenient. But if you're talking about buying $1 million home in Brightwood, that person isn't taking the metro to work, and they're telecommuting now. You can use Uber to get around. So I think the public transit is going to be much less important as far as location.
Now, does that potentially mean though that you could see? Not that I think you're completely right. And I think the other thing is some of these neighborhoods like, Riggs Park, Fort Totten are kind of suburban enough. You can easily get off street parking and have your own car. But does that mean that you'll start to see even more growth into the suburban areas? Like why live in city proper at all if you're going to own a car?
Well, I think part of the reason we'll see growth into the suburban areas too is sort of an ongoing thing we've seen for, many decades is that people get priced out of the city neighborhoods they want to live in. Right. And they have no choice but to go to the suburbs. And so Silver Spring, particularly along Georgia Ave corridor, is very easily commutable into the city in 50% of the price than if you just cross the border.
When you go as you get a little bit further north, Forest Glen, Wheaton, Glenmont, you can get stuff in the $5s for a single family detached home. And also we talked about this, I think on episode 1, condos in the very inner ring we both think are going to become Manhattanized. You want to talk about that?
So I don't necessarily think it's just condos. I think any of the properties, particularly in the downtown corridors, are going to be Manhattanized. They're just going to grow to such levels that your everyday person won't be able to buy in DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, U Street. So if you have the opportunity to buy in those neighborhoods now, do it now, because in 10, 15 years, you won't even be in the same ballpark of being able to afford them.
And that's why I think that part of Northwest is going to be the big appreciation centers, because it was overlooked. No one knows what Manor Park is. Yeah. I remember we looked at an open house and it was like, welcome to Manor Park. We're like, what is Manor Park? Some of those neighborhoods you don't even know, no one's even uttered the words Manor Park, but.
And they're right in the path of gentrification, right? So gentrification has been very linear moving up Georgia Ave from Chinatown to Shaw to Petworth, and now it's Brightwood and 16th Street Heights and Tacoma and Manor Park's time.
Right, because those neighborhoods were overlooked because they, in general, have really poor public transit. But now that public transit isn't as important anymore, with teleworking and Uber and things like that, I think that now that's going to be why people are looking to that. That's one of the few affordable areas left in Northwest.
And probably not for long.
And maybe it's already over. I have a tenant of mine she's threatened to go move out and buy a condo of her own for the last like 15 years. And she was looking in that Brightwood area, and she's like, I'm already priced out of that. So
Brightwood's that might be, you think that's one of the 4 or 5 hottest neighborhoods in the city in the last year? Brightwood's been really hot.
Well, I mean, the price points in Brightwood, if you're looking to buy a full row house, and the price points they're expensive, but they're way less expensive than, say, just Petworth to the south of it. We're talking about $200,000 delta pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's just at that price point, close to the median where everyone can afford. So, give it a few more years. It's going to be pushed up in price quite a bit.
That only makes sense, right? Because during the pandemic, people were looking for single family homes with a yard and whatever. And if you're looking in Northwest, that was the only affordable area left. And then if you've been working from home for the last year, then you're like, well, I don't mind living in the middle of this, place that has a walk score of like 10 or whatever, because, you never went anywhere anyway.
We should mention Brentwood just because I have a flip going on there. That's another neighborhood that I think.
I mean, Brentwood's right there along that New York Ave corridor, Route 50. It's right in the path of development too.
Really get to Union Market really easily.
Yeah, and Union Market's super cool, though we just tried to get lunch there.
It was so cool we couldn't park.
Drove around for a half hour, couldn't find parking. And our last question we'll go over today sort of leads into our next segment. So Brendan asks, what is the best strategy for house hacking in the district? And what I think is the best or two best strategies is, either to get a property with an ADU, a basement rental, or to do rent by the room. The reason this is significant is this is Ron's specialty. Ron is a specialist at the rent by the room strategy. And he is killing it. He is retired early from the federal government using this job. He retired. How old were you when you retired, Ron?
Oh God. Do you want my club age well, you're 84. So I guess we're not totally accurate. I think I was 43 when I retired. And when I go on Personal Capital now, like I had set when I was 40, I had set 43 as the age that I want to retire, and it still says like, are you going to be able to retire at 43? Like, because they want you to call them and they're going to help you with your stock portfolio or whatever. But it's just like, I've already. Hey, can you swear on this podcast, or are we trying to keep the explicit?
You can swear.
It's like, bitch, I'm already retired. Like, so, but yeah, I was at 43. So,
yeah, I think it's amazing because when I first met you, you'd call me and you were looking for a multifamily property. It was 5 years ago, maybe now?
2017. So
4 years ago. And you had told me that you had a goal to retire in, I think, 3 years at the time. And I was like, all right, well, let's start with property number one. Let's figure it out. And I don't know that I really thought you could retire that quickly, but Ron is one of the most creative real estate investors I've ever met. And he just figured out a way to make the numbers work where he was going to get enough income to leave his job. And
I did it in 2 to 3 years. In the fall of 2017 is when I bought that property on 14th Street.
Yep.
And then I moved into the basement, and I was paid $2,000 a month by renting out the upstairs rooms. I was able to live in my own basement apartment, so, just isolated front and back entrance, my own laundry, everything, didn't have to go upstairs for anything. And I was being paid $2,000 a month.
You were making $2,000 above. So what was your mortgage payment? About $4,000?
I think it was like $3,500 for PITI.
Yep. And so he lived in the ADU that was in the basement.
Occupying the most lucrative, if I wanted to be even super cheap,
right, because that probably would have made $17.50 in rent at
something like that, right? So if I wanted to be super cheap, I would have lived in the smallest bedroom upstairs, rented out the basement. So even if you like, I wanted to treat myself to a basement apartment, as silly as that sounds, but that was an upgrade in my living situation at the time. So Yeah, I mean, you can even do it, even cheaper and even more economical.
Right. So you did it while still having a little bit of semblance of privacy. Maybe you weren't in the largest space, but it was, it was perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, it was the whole footprint of the house. So, I mean, it was a pretty big space. And that 14th Street, those 14th Street row houses in Upper 14th Street are like double wide.
Yeah, and I will say one of the keys of the one of the keys of the strategy is to being able to maximize the amount of people you can get in the property. So DC allows 6 unrelated people to live in the property. And for reference, most of the Maryland counties allow 5 people and most of the Virginia allow 4 people. So when you can get, 5 or 6 people into these row houses, if they're all paying, say, $1,000 each, and some of them pay more than that, you're talking about $5,000, $6,000 a month in rent you can get. But that property, I think is a really unique situation that now I've started looking for is that it's a 4-level row house. Most of them are 3 levels, but we do find these occasional 4-level, row houses. And when we usually do find them, they're either in Columbia Heights or DuPont or Logan or 16th Street Heights, sort of through those parts of the city. And having that extra level allowed actually where you get the highest rent in that house, right?
Right. I get $1,200. Well, at the time I got $1,200. Now I get $1,277.
Yeah. So the 4th level is essentially, almost like he rents it as a room, but it's got its own private bathroom up there. It's got a little sitting area and a sleeping area. So it's almost like a little contained studio.
I put a little mini fridge up there so the person doesn't have to go down 2 flights of stairs to get a beer or whatever, right? They have their own bathroom. I mean, really the only thing that they're in the rest of the house for is the laundry, to do the laundry. Other than that, they have everything they need up there. I mean, if you're doing takeout or getting delivery or whatever. But if you're a chef and you need a big kitchen, then you can share the kitchen with them.
Well, the rent by the room demographic are typically going to be people that eat out, right? Or get Uber Eats.
Exactly.
Yeah, I imagine the type of people who would rent by the room are the type of people who aren't spending that much time in their residence, right?
Right. They're not really, totally. I'll go to open houses. I'll have an open house to fill a vacant room, and it'll be Saturday afternoon, and it's a house with 6 people, and it's fully occupied. And you got to think that maybe they're going to have friends over and stuff, or boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever. I'll go over to the open house and no one's home, which is good because it can be a little intimidating or a little too much if you've got 6 people in a house and the prospective tenant is a little turned off by that. But if no one's home at the time, then, it shows better.
Do you ever have to deal with any drama between different tenants?
All the time.
Okay.
So the drawback of this is that it is a more management intensive strategy. So you could buy a house in, Wheaton, Maryland, rent it out to a family, and probably never hear from those tenants all
And that's
year.
my strategy. Yeah. I have no headaches with my tenants whatsoever.
Right. But I'm retired. So not that you couldn't retire if you wanted to, Russell, but I'm retired. So if you're trying to fast forward, if I'm trying to meet the goal of when Russell and I met at the fall of 2017, and I tell him that I want to retire in 2 or 3 years, and Russell's like, okay, well, let's start with this and then see how we're doing. But here we are, and I met the goal. But how did I meet the goal? I met it by being creative, like Russell was saying. But also, this strategy does require more of your time. But now that I'm retired, I can put a little bit more time.
You really figured out how to maximize the amount of rent, the highest yield you could get from a property, and that's by squeezing as many people as we can in there legally, renting it out individually. Because the difference between these people paying $1,000 or $1,200 for a room versus getting their own apartment at $1,700, $1,800 may not sound like a big difference, but when you're 22, 23, 24 years old, that extra $500 a month is a huge amount of money to them.
Right. And you talk about it like it's an option. It's not an option for a lot of these people that are interning at Congress making below poverty.
They're making
level.
$30,000,
right.
Maybe on the hill.
They're relying on lobbyist banquets to eat, and they're not going to be able to afford.
And our city has 100,000 of these kids that are out there. And, I was one of them when I moved to DC. I lived with 3 roommates where, I think we were paying like $600 each to rent a house in Silver Spring. Like, that's all I could afford because I was young and didn't have a great job
Right.
yet.
So my demographic is someone, probably it's their first job or they just moved to DC and they're early 20-somethings, young professional. I hate the term young professional because what does that really mean? Aren't we all professional or whatever? But anyway.
I'm very young.
So, but it's those people that can't afford $2,000 for a 1-bedroom on Capitol Hill, but they want to live in a nice neighborhood. They want to live in Columbia Heights. They want to live in DuPont. They want to live where the nightlife is. They don't have a car. They didn't bring a car to DC. So they want to live in the walkable, high walk score neighborhoods of, Petworth and Columbia Heights and DuPont and Shaw.
And so they end up in a property like yours or hundreds of other investors using the same strategy.
Right. So for $800, they're living in a really nice house. They have a nice room. They, the only
and you're able to eke out almost twice as much rent as this property would normally get by doing that.
Absolutely.
So we bought that first one. And I think we let a little bit of time go by. And then what was the next property we purchased after that?
So we have to let a little time go by because you have to understand, and Russell knows this, I'm going to zero every time I buy a property. So
yeah, and I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone. Ron has a particularly high risk tolerance where he does not mind having $0 in the bank. But as soon as he hasn't, whatever that next dollar is to buy the next property, he was doing it.
Right. So I was able to bank with my government job. And again, I want to say this is not a high paying government job. I wasn't doing like a lot of your clients are probably lawyers and doctors and high salary individuals. I was doing all of this on a meager government salary, federal government salary. And like I said, I did it in like 2 or 3 years. So anyone can do this. Maybe it's going to be a little slower if you're only making $50,000 a year. Maybe you have to start, maybe not with $1 million row house. Maybe you have to start with a condo that's like a 2-bedroom condo that has a big,
I've got plenty of clients that start in sort of the 4s or the 5s that buy a sort of median priced condo or single family home. Not everyone needs to start with an $800,000 or $900,000 house.
Like my condo in Southwest.
Yep.
I would not recommend a condo in Southwest because of the high condo fees to do this. But let's say you got a condo in Logan Circle with low expenses that I'm saying my condo in Southwest is an example of floor plan. So if you remember the common area, the living room, dining room combination room of my Southwest condo was huge. Mm-hmm. If I was going to house hack and live in that condo now, what I would do, it was a 2-bedroom condo. What I would do is I would rent out the 2 bedrooms. I'd fashion a little partition in the living room and I would live in the living room for free and rent out the 2 bedrooms.
Well, this goes to sort of part of your strategy here that I skipped over that I forgot about with your 14th Street house and sort of, right, how do we maximize the house to get the most people in? And one of your strategies that we developed there is most buyers are looking for a fully open concept, right?
I am anti-open concept.
Ron hates open concept. Right. So we took this
strategy is
the dining room in that house, and dining rooms are pretty substantial.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the biggest room in the house. Yeah. It's 16 by 12 feet.
So threw some doors on there. Boom. There's another bedroom.
Right. All I had to do was to convert that to a bedroom was there were original 100-year-old pocket doors that led into the living room. All I had to do was close the pocket doors, put a latch on the dining room side of the room, and then voila.
Another bedroom.
You have another bedroom.
Because in these rent by the room situations, we do not need a full living room and full dining room for 23-year-old kids that are not going to use either of those rooms.
Exactly. People aren't having big family dinners at these group houses. Like you said, people barely use the living room. You got to leave one common area room just because you never know what you're going to do in the future. So let's say something happened and you need to sell it.
Well, and the dining room is easily deconverted back to a dining room too,
That's
right?
True. That's
just you put doors where there's already places for doors.
True. So in this case, there was already a door there.
Yeah.
And then in a lot of these DC row houses, there's the old screened-in porches that a lot of people have drywalled in. Those rooms are significantly large. So if you're looking at like that common DC row house floor plan where you have that upstairs, it's like a 3-bedroom, and upstairs you have that big front room, Then you have like another normal sized room. And then you have that tiny room that everyone stages with a crib or whatever because you couldn't even fit a twin size bed in there. So I would say convert that room into the common area, throw a futon in there, hang a TV on the wall, and then turn the back porch room into, drywall it in if it's not drywalled in right now.
So Ron's doing the exact opposite of what Jack's doing in a flip. Jack's trying to open up every wall he can.
Well,
but what are people looking for?
Yeah, it's different clientele, right? It's different. Although I think, as an aside, I find the open concept thing, even as a place to live, not that it should be as broken up, but I think it's kind of weird. And I wonder if, especially with people working from home more, whether some of the idea of having rooms will come back into.
Yeah, I think it will. In 20 years, it'll be like right now.
Everything cycles.
Right,
we'll be putting walls back up.
Yeah. Right. I think so. Yeah. Because people are going to be like, okay, I didn't really need to see my children while I'm cooking dinner.
That's actually an interesting question. I assume a lot of your tenants during COVID were, working from home. Did that change the dynamic of your, if they weren't out as much, did that change the dynamic of your?
I mean, they definitely were home. I would say utilities went up a little bit, but I bill back the utilities to my tenants, so I don't really care about that.
How did the sharing of the common space work when people were home more?
So in some cases, I would actually see people using the common space. Like I would see 2 or 3 tenants actually sitting on the couch watching a movie together in the living room. But that was just a force of the quarantine, I think. Like, I don't think,
So they came out of their rooms a little bit more.
Came out of their rooms and actually
using that common space a little bit more.
Yeah, you have some common space. Like, good. Like, it's good that they had that. But for the most part, my tenants spend their whole time in their rooms. Their rooms, especially in this 14th Street house, the rooms are so big.
Those rooms are big, yeah.
That there's room for you to have a couch or a futon plus...
Or a desk.
Right. Plus a desk. Plus your, king size bed or whatever. So there's enough room that you can kind of create your own little apartment and your own little studio in the rooms themselves. So why would you go hang out with...
So circling back to the next property you got, after we bought that house, you went down to $0 in the bank. But You're able to save up very quickly because now you have the rental income coming from this property. You're living for free. You eliminated your rent payments.
Exactly.
Which is why this is such an awesome house hacking strategy. And I'm not trying to promise anyone out there that we can get you to live for free or in Ron's case, actually get paid $2,000 a month to live there. That's not going to happen on every...
The market's changed.
The market's changed, but
there's always opportunities. It's always
about figuring out the most creative way to use the property.
You bring that client to me, Russell, and I'll figure out a way to make that property.
Well, I think it's also a good thing about just like in general. It's not necessarily, I think people struggle with this. You might make, and this is with flipping, with anything, you might make less money than you would have a few years ago because the market's hot, but it's still, okay, what is the best maximization? Yeah. If you're getting 80% of what Ron did, that's still awesome.
But so you're living in the basement there. So now you're not paying $2,000 a month in a mortgage or rent someplace. So you're saving whatever that monthly housing payment is. You're getting paid another $2,000 a month or so profit there. And you have your government salary coming in. So you're able to save up relatively quickly. What was it? Right. It was probably a year later, maybe we bought the next property.
Yeah. So, I mean, even with the meager government salary, and keep in mind also, I'm super cheap. Like I was really good at being a cheapskate. Delaying gratification was my superpower. Like I was really, really good at.
You had a goal in mind and you were hyper focused on making it happen. You understood short-term sacrifice for long-term gain.
Because I didn't want to work in that government job. Now, or any job. I said this, I made that video for Bigger Pockets.
Yeah, it was right about a year ago. Alex Fleece came into town. We made that Bigger Pockets video with you.
And I said in that video, I just casually mentioned, like, I didn't want to wake up at 8 in the morning anymore or whatever. And someone in the YouTube comments said, like, this guy's like a baby. He's complaining about whatever. So I want to state right now that if you're going to be negative, like, don't go on the internet. If there's any place to make comments about this podcast, Apple Podcasts or whatever, I want you to not make any negative comments about this episode because I'm here out of the kindness of my heart. If you listen carefully, I'm going to tell you how to retire in 2 years. But I mean, I'm giving this information out for free, right? So I don't want this. So I'm nice and I make this video with Alex and we put it online. Alex spends time, editing it and everything. It's free information, free advice that like Grant Cardone would charge you $20,000 at a Marriott, banquet room to learn about, right? And I'm going to give it to you for free if you listen to the end of this podcast. So no negativity. If you're going to negatively comment on this, you're not the audience for this podcast. And and Russell doesn't want to work with you. In fact, I want you to delete this podcast from your subscription feed. I want you to call your ISP and cancel your internet. Go back. Remember when the internet was, because we're about the same age, Russell. Yeah. We're both 84. Remember when the internet, maybe you're a little too young. Because I think you're like 4 years or so.
Well, he's 83, so
I'm
84.
2 years younger than you, I think.
Okay, so when I went to college, the internet was just becoming a thing. So the internet, when I was in college, you could only access it two different ways. You had to be at a university, because the network of computers were basically university-centric. Yeah. So you had to be a university student, so you had to be somewhat college-educated, or you had to be a big enough geek that you would figure out how to get Usenet working at home or whatever.
Dial into the bulletin board systems.
Right.
You guys are so old.
And then, but the internet was so cool back then because it was like an exclusive smart people club. Now you've got...
Now any asshole can get
every fucking idiot is on the internet, and the internet is a two-way street, right? Where they can give feedback. Like, it's not like the TV.
Just so you know, Ron, I'm going to now go and leave a comment on the podcast episode.
Then I will hunt you. If you leave a negative comment, I'm retired now. I've got nothing but time and money. I will hunt you down.
Ron, I'm right here.
Oh, okay.
You don't need to.
So no negativity. Why would you? So that guy just made me so mad when I saw his comment on my YouTube.
One of the reasons I became self-employed too was I didn't like for years waking up at 6:30 in the morning to get up and then commute to work.
How dare he call me out on that? Yeah. Who likes to get up in the morning?
So there are weirdos who really like getting up early at 5 a.m. and going to the gym. I don't like those people. But
sure, but then don't go on my YouTube video and it takes energy to do that. Don't waste calories on being negative. So if you're that person, Russell doesn't want you as a client. I don't want you listening to this. Advice is not for you. This is only for positive people. Cancel your ISP. Go back to watching TV where you can't give feedback. You know what I mean? Remember how it used to be so great when we were kids because TV, you can yell at the TV, but you can't leave negative comments about the TV show or whatever. It's the problem with the internet is it's a two-way street now, and every idiot has a voice. No. So,
but the idiots leaving negative comments, they're just jealous because they're working their 9 to 5 while you're retired. I'm self-employed. Jack's self-employed. We all get to live the lives that we want to live.
I actually do wonder because, I feel like every time I talk to this, what percentage of real estate investors do you think are just people who don't like getting up early? I feel like that's a huge motivation for a lot of people. I'm also kind of a night owl. I'll stay up till 2 a.m. I wonder if it's
I don't know. I feel like it must be more than we think it is.
Oh, I bet I have no idea, but I bet it is way more than the average population. I think a lot of people who are real estate investors you ask them what the reason is, I don't want to get up at 8 a.m.
Right. So it's a perfectly common, valid, I would think most people can relate to that. So it was annoying that that's what he pointed out or whatever. And I think that I remember anytime it was inclement weather, I was so cheap that I was working in Silver Spring. But since where I lived in 14th Street, I had a Zone 4 parking decal.
That's valuable.
Which was all of that part of Northwest that we were just talking about, we think is going to be the appreciation. It's that big swath of Northwest.
That triangle.
All the way up to the border. So I worked right by the Silver Spring Metro, and I could park on the DC on Eastern Avenue, park on the DC side of Eastern Avenue legally all day for free, saving myself $150 from the parking garage, but I would have to walk 2 blocks to work every day after driving. So, and it was kind of up a hill. And if it was snowing or raining and it's 8 a.m. and I'm still not totally awake yet, every time that would happen, and that was my motivation to just get out of the rat race. So
you were saving and saving and saving.
So saving and saving and saving.
We get the down payment for the next property.
Right. So the only, the only reason why I wouldn't buy a next property is because I didn't have the money for the down payment. And just to circle back, we were talking about, I was trying to think of, we were talking about when I go back to $0. So everyone has their emergency, or you should have your emergency cash fund, right? But my emergency cash fund was a HELOC that I had on a condo that I had bought when I was like 22 years old. It was my first property in DC. It was the Southwest condo. So when I refinanced that condo, I threw a little $40,000 HELOC on top of it that I never really touched, but I knew that I had that $40,000 if I ever needed it. So that was my emergency cash. If the roofs blew off all of my properties and insurance didn't cover it or something, that was where I was getting
as an aside, if you have any properties you can open up HELOCs on, you should just do it. You don't have to tap the HELOC there. What do they cost to open
like $500 for the year or something.
To open up a HELOC, you should always do it because it's free and you don't actually have to tap it if you don't want to.
It was the last thing I did before I retired and
got HELOCs where you needed them.
I got a HELOC on that 14th Street property as a primary residence, and this is an aside, but I guess you can edit this out if it gets boring. But because Russell meets the appraiser.
Yeah, this is a good tip. If you're getting a refinance done or a HELOC or anything with the appraiser, get your real estate agent to meet the appraiser, have them prepare an appraisal packet, because the appraiser is going to respect that agent more than a member of the general public, and you're going to get a higher valuation on that appraisal.
It's not your personal intimidation factor.
No, and funny enough, when we were doing this appraisal, the guy's listening to me and Ron talk, and we're talking real estate like we always do while we're there. And, I'm always nice to the appraiser and build some rapport with him. And he goes, "Have I heard you guys on a podcast before?" I go, "Well, yeah, I've been on a number of podcasts." I was like, and he had recognized me from being on the Bigger Pockets podcast. And then he clicked in, he knew my name. Well, then he gave us a valuation of the appraisal that was much higher than it should have been. Right. And it's just because it didn't matter if he knew who I was, but really it was about meeting the appraiser there, building some rapport with them, showing them that you respect their job enough, and providing them data to help them do their job.
And also, if you're do their jobs, that's the right term. If you're giving them comps, you're doing the job for them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They don't have to go and search for comps. Comps don't seem like it's the strong suit of these appraisers, because remember we were trying to get one house appraised, it was one of the houses that I was trying to buy, and the appraisal comes in, the market rent comps came in really low. We're looking at like a 6-bedroom house, and the appraiser,
they were saying like $2,500 or something.
Right. Because all the comparables for rent were, 3-bedroom houses a mile away or whatever. So, if any help you can provide the appraiser with comps, and especially comps that you've selected, maybe they're a little higher than normal. And I think you even threw in like some of there was one that seemed exceedingly high. So
you always want to throw in a high comp there to justify a higher value, whether it's accurate or not.
Right. So
you get your HELOC, that's your emergency fund.
Right. So I got my so going to zero isn't as scary as it sounds, because I had the HELOC in place. That was my emergency cash. But anyway, I never needed to tap into it. So then let's say, like I was saying, with my meager salary and being super cheap and making $2,000 a month off the rental, then I was able to pocket like $10,000 a month. And so after about a year, I had enough money, I thought, to buy another property. And so then in 2018, that's when I looked at, I was like, okay, the numbers are too high in DC. Where else can I do the rent by the room strategy? Where else would people be willing to live with 5 other people, 4 other people in a crowded house? And, where would the rent by the room strategy work other than the city? And I was thinking, okay, let me check Fairfax, because George Mason University is there. Well, that really didn't work. The numbers didn't work. Okay, let me check College Park, because the University of Maryland is there. I was trying to think of what are big universities, big schools, where that would be maybe the demographic that would do this rent by the room thing. So then I went on when I got the idea of College Park, I went on the MLS, and on the MLS was this house, this single family home. It was in a zone single family residential area.
Primo location.
Primo location. If you want to visit my property, it's right by the metro station. It's the closest residential.
And it was just sitting on the market for months. And your strategy was already being implemented in this property.
It was perfect for me. It was a single family home that the owner had hacked up into 5 apartments, basically. To keep it legal with the city, you can only have the stove in 1 unit.
So it's legally a single family home because there's only 1 stove. There's 5 kitchens, but only 1 stove in the entire house.
Right. Or as we would call it in the appraisal, wet bar.
Yep.
Because really the kitchens, and I'm doing air quotes right now, the kitchens or kitchenettes or wet bars or whatever you want to call them are really just a kitchen sink, some cabinets, and a refrigerator. And you can bring hot plates, toaster ovens, all that stuff, and you can microwaves. You put all those things together, air fryer, whatever. You put all those things together, you can make yourself a little.
But really cool house. Looks like a single family in the outside, and when you go in, there's doors to 5 different units.
Right. Exactly.
so
So it was all chopped up and all exact, and it's in College Park, like you had said before. It's 5 unrelated.
And what's
adults.
interesting is that the seller on this was using a discount agent who just throws it on the MLS. And this house would have been much better served being listed as either a multifamily in the MLS or as a commercial property, because your single family home buyers are not the person that was going to buy this really weird, unique property. So it was not being advertised properly. It was sitting there stagnant on the MLS. I think it was maybe listed at 550-ish, somewhere around there.
If I had to remember correctly, I think it would be 540.
And so we go to look at it and we love it.
It's like I said, perfect. Like there's nothing. It's turnkey for me.
Yeah.
The tenants were in there. There's nothing I would need to do. He even left the one of the units. A person had moved out and he left it empty. Which, if I was, we could talk about this later, maybe. But if I was able to get normal residential, conventional financing on it, I would have potentially been able to move into the vacant room, the vacant part of the vacant unit, and then get owner-occupied financing and live there or whatever. So there were, it was perfectly set up. There was nothing I didn't need to hang any doors to make a new room or anything.
And one of the things I really loved about negotiating this property.
I love the story.
We went to go visit it, and because it's listed just by like essentially a flat fee broker, it's the owner that meets us there. Really nice guy. We're actually friends with him now. And, you know, we go throughout the property and he's selling us on the pluses of it and telling us all about it. And at the end of it, I go to Ron. I go, Ron, how much do you want to pay for this house? And I forget how much you said, maybe $525 or something.
I don't remember.
You probably would have paid less, right? If you had to.
I actually would have paid more because it was one of the 1% rule doesn't work in this area, right?
But we essentially got about
But it
the
was
1%.
about 1%.
But so I'd asked Ron what he's willing to pay for this property, and I think you had said $520 or $525, and I said we're going to buy this house for $500,000, and Ron's like, what do you mean? I go, 3 times in the last hour, this owner has told us how much he's willing to sell the house for. He goes, what do you mean? I go, I was like, the owner has said, you know how hard it is to save $500,000? Something, saving $500,000. 3 times he'd mentioned the terms saving $500,000. I was like, that's his price. His price is $500,000 on this property. And this is why you should never, ever let a buyer or seller really talk directly to someone who's, I didn't screw this guy. I was just paying attention to what he said.
Right.
Talked about that last episode with our condo.
Yeah. You just got to pay attention to what someone's saying. And he gave me his tell. He told me exactly what he was willing to pay. And we made him an offer where we knew we would get countered to where we wouldn't want to be. And I think we structured it where we did some seller subsidy, but I think it was exactly a net of 500,000
exactly.
net sales price.
Yeah, it was exactly
which
what
we
you
got
said.
done just by listening to what the guy had to say.
Yeah, so definitely. So a few things: don't use a discount broker or whatever, which you think you're saving money, but that 1% or whatever that you're paying is all you're getting is listed on the MLS. So don't go it alone because Russell is going to pay for himself. Or a real estate agent is going to pay for them. A good real estate agent is going to pay for themselves. It's like how I think of it, like an accountant. If I'm going to pay $500 to have an accountant prepare my taxes, then they should have found over $500 in savings somewhere in some tax loophole that I didn't know about, if I did it on TurboTax myself or whatever. So I probably can tell you, Russell's probably saved me, I think if I add it up, it's probably $200,000 from negotiating sale on properties that I'm trying to buy, negotiating the sale price down, but still getting the property. Because I'm always scared I'm going to lose the property.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. When we bought your most recent personal sale, I think was your primary residence, and we go into this house, and Ron turns to me and goes, "You hate this house, don't you?" I go, "Yeah, I do." But Ron loved it, right? And he's like, "Let's buy it." And Ron was ready to pay the list price. I'm like, "We are not paying the list price on this." And hey, most times we get a bid way over the property, over list to get the properties. This was in Columbia Heights. And I'm just like, "No, Ron, everything that most buyers want in a house, this house doesn't have it. I understand that you love it, but the majority of buyers don't."
What was the issue?
It was not open concept at all.
Okay.
It's
walls everywhere.
It's an old farmhouse.
Okay.
And Russell lives in a condo where, probably everything's taken care of.
Open concept, brand new, pretty.
Brand new, right. And this is an old 1904 farmhouse or whatever. And Russell's bougie and likes nice modern things. And when he walked into this, and the couple that lived there, the previous owners were like an older couple. The man was 50 something and the woman was 70 something. So it was decorated. It showed. It was staged as an old person house. Now I've gone in there. I've pimped it out. I got a home theater. I painted all the walls, wacky, bold colors. Like, it's awesome now.
But the point was, majority of buyers would not like this house. We were not going to pay the list price, even if it was reasonable. We negotiated the price down, and we included, $20,000-$25,000 in closing costs help in the deal. And we got it for a much better price than what you were willing to pay for it.
Right.
And
we didn't get it down as low as you wanted because the list price is like $880,000, I think.
I think we got to $850?
Right. But you had said to me, I don't think the price for this house begins with an 8.
Yeah.
Meaning that it was overpriced by, at least $80,000.
I think we got to $850 with $20,000 in closing costs, but
yeah, and in fact,
way lower than what they wanted.
It's actually a funny story. The last rental we bought with Russell, this is another kind of one of those stories. And also one thing I think people, especially in this market, can get caught up in is like a feeding frenzy. Like, it's really good to be disciplined. And even if you miss out, you'll find a needle in a haystack. But the last property we did, this was a funny property. This was a really good, I think we hit it was 0.6, 0.7%.
Is this the one in Crown?
Yeah, in Gaithersburg, which is pretty good. And not quite 1%, but anything over 0.5% is pretty good. It was listed at 380 on the MLS, which was way too much. They drop it to 330. And I said, "Russell, and we had missed out on a bunch of properties and we hadn't bid enough." I'm like, 330 is fine. Let's just do it. Let's get it done. Russell said, let's offer 3. And I said, I missed out. I'm like, it's going to get bid back up because it had a $50,000 price drop. And I'm like, let's just get it. Like, I want this property. I don't really care. And
and in this case, I knew that the photographs on the property were terrible.
They were pretty bad.
Absolutely terrible. The property wasn't, just the photographs were. So I knew that because of how bad these pictures were, that the property was being overlooked in the market.
But again, we just had a $50,000 price drop. So I'm like, that's as much as they're going to take. And Russell said, "You have to offer 3. I said, "Fine, I'll offer 3.
And
we thought they'd counter. We thought
they would counter. And they just accepted the offer for 3.
And then we had bought this with like a 7-day inspection, but we hadn't actually seen the house yet because we thought they'd reject the offer. And we get in there. I'm like, well, must have been wrong with it. And we've had a couple of repairs, but nothing,
Nothing major. More if it's been your problem with your tenants more than the property.
No, we've had, I'd say, so it's a combination. We've had, $6, $7, $8 grand of stuff just go. It's always, this is an interesting thing about being like a landlord. Like it's not that I have any problem fixing the stuff. Some of the stuff is, a little bit much, but a lot of the stuff, it was genuinely, it's just kind of like, and this is something I always like when I think is an interesting conversation, especially with labor being hard to come by and stuff slow. Like when something breaks, this particular tenant can tend to get very panicked and like, what's the worst case scenario? Right. And it's like, we fix everything we fixed, but it's just kind of about the level of panic and also understanding that things take time. Everything is, on the flip we're doing, we just ordered windows and doors. And it's going to be 45 to 90 days. Just everything is taking
taking longer.
And tenants, I think, sometimes don't understand.
Labor costs are up.
And they think that you're like, you're slowing it up, but it's really just getting someone out there is a 2-week process.
But yeah, in this case, though, the moral of the story there is that I had a very good sense of what we could offer in both these situations, and we got those prices down more than I think both of you guys thought that we could.
Yeah, and I don't think you guys were talking, I was thinking, I don't think I've ever lost a deal. Like, I was always concerned about losing the deal, right? Like,
hey, 95% of the time, I'm telling my clients, we get a bit higher. So, and I think, right, people are usually surprised then when I'm saying, no, let's lowball this one, right?
And also,
because it's very rare we get to lowball in this market.
And, if you do lose out, I mean, I think it's different, right? If it's a primary residence and that's where you want to live, and you pay $20,000 more over 30 years and you're paying $100, $200 more a month, that's one thing and you should live where you want to live. But for an investment, if you lose out, there's always another one. It's not,
there's always another one. But you also have to have realistic expectations in the market. But let's circle back here and try to get through the details on this, on the College Park house. If you guys are actually curious to see this house, Bigger Pockets has a video on this property. I can link to the show notes, the video.
You should definitely leave a comment about Ron's sleeping schedule.
Yeah.
No negative comments. I will.
So we got that house for a $500,000 net sales price. I think it was 505 with 5,000 in closing help, something
good
like
memory,
that.
Russell.
And we were getting right around $5,000 a month in rent from this property, right?
That's right.
And one of the things I liked that you were able to do in this property, and we've done that with the subsequent property too, is the owner in that property was paying utilities himself, and you went in and optimized it over a period of time and started billing the utilities back to the tenants, right? So you were able to actually raise the net operating income of the property by billing the utilities back.
Exactly. So I call it, use the word optimize. That's what I call it. I call it optimizing and stabilizing. So still all my properties are not optimized and stabilized because I have, for example, in that property, I inherited a tenant who was 89 years old at the time.
You won't be able to optimize till he dies.
Right, because I'm not going to raise the rent on the 92-year-old man or whatever. So, he's way below market rent. I inherited a couple below market rent tenants, but then they moved out, and then I look at that as an opportunity to raise rent. So, so I typically don't raise rent on my current tenants. I just kind of like, why rock the boat for $25 extra a month or whatever. So, once I stabilize these properties, and, kind of maximize everything and optimize these properties, you can make even more money. So, and definitely billing back the utilities is a good way to do it.
Because that's thousands of dollars per year.
Instant way to increase, to decrease your expenses and increase your cash flow. And billing it back was as easy as, I used to use Cozy. Now it got bought out by CoStar and Apartments.com. So now it's basically Apartments.com, but it's the rental manager part. It's like Venmo for landlords and tenants.
And if you don't mind sharing at this point, how much a month do you generally net cash flow?
Portfolio wide?
Yeah.
After all expenses are taken out and after, I take 10% for repairs and CapEx. I just kind of throw them together on my little spreadsheet. I'm back to having in my vacancy slot on the spreadsheet. I'm back to that being 2%.
That's really low.
Back before the pandemic, I would change that to 0 because for the whole time I was a landlord doing rent by the room strategy, there was only one room. This is before the pandemic. One room in one house during Christmas time that was vacant for 2 weeks. That was my vacancy
pretty
for years. Then the pandemic, messed everything up. But now I feel like since July, I think the demand was something happened in July that
People
everything's
got vaccinated.
Yeah. If people got vaccinated, people are like, I'm going to live back in the city now. I'm going to return from my parents' house in the country, and I'm going to start working at that bar that I used to work at.
So vacancy was higher during the pandemic. And we're actually going to talk about that and some other issues on the next episode with Ron as well, where he had higher vacancy during the pandemic and there's some other bullshit he had to deal with. But we're going to talk about those specific hard things on the next episode.
But not, to answer your question, non-optimized, meaning that I'm not forward thinking like, okay, when that 92-year-old tenant dies, I'm going to get more than $800 for his room. With current rents, with taking a 2% for vacancy and 10% for repairs, I will net about $7,000 a month.
Every month net. That's pretty good. Mm-hmm. And your portfolio is probably the actual
value of it is skyrocketing.
Double, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you're making you're retired, you're making $85,000 a year from rentals.
And whether I wrongly or rightly am including, because they're like, don't include your primary residence in your net worth calculations.
I mean, we're just doing round numbers here. We're not going to audit this.
So, but I am including the $4,000 PITI payment for my primary residence that I don't rent out.
You include that in your cash flow.
I include that in my cash flow.
So you're making $85,000 a year and living without a mortgage, essentially, because your tenants are paying that mortgage.
And your portfolio, you must have a couple million in equity now, right?
I think it's like, if you look at Zillow and you add up all those estimates, it's like 4.5 million. So I control $4.5 million of real estate assets.
And you did this in about 4 years? Pretty good, I would say.
Yeah. So, and it's only 4 rental properties. It's a nice, sleek little portfolio that I don't have to worry about. I feel bad for those people.
And we did some optimizing of your portfolio earlier this year, right? So we had your condo that was sort of losing some money, right?
It was because the condo fees are so high. And again, I didn't buy this condo when I was 22. I wasn't thinking, oh, is this going to be a good cash flowing property? I was looking for a cheap place for me to live. Yeah. And that condo back then, Southwest, 20 years ago, Southwest, no one even knew what it was. They were everyone. Still to this day, people are like Southeast. I'm like, no, Southwest. No one knows what Southwest was. But that condo was a 2-bedroom condo, and I could rent out the second bedroom for I don't know, $600, $700 a month. My monthly payments, I think, was like $1,200 or something. So, I was living in DC for a couple $100s a month by getting a roommate. So it worked for me.
I want to go back to one thing that you said about only having 4 properties. That's one of the things I really like about DC and in general. And we've talked about this before. I think people get really obsessed with the number of doors they have. And to me, that's just like more stuff to manage. Like
I want less doors that are more expensive.
And it's easier to manage. I mean, what's your story about the guy who came up to you at one of the conventions?
Yeah, so I was at this convention in Philadelphia a few years ago, and I forget exactly what he had said, but I'm talking to him and he's like, well, how many doors do you have? And I'm like, well, I got about a dozen doors. He's like, I was like, how many do you have? He's like, I forget what he said, 100, 125 doors.
I felt bad
or something.
for him. That sounds like so much
work.
I
feel bad for them.
And the guy
changed the term from doors to HVACs. You have to manage 100 HVACs.
But the guy,
point of like
doing guy goes, right, let me finish the story on it. He's like, oh, I got 125 doors. Don't worry, you'll get there someday. And
your portfolio.
And I go, well, what's the value? What's your management's under assets? What's the value of that portfolio? And I forget what he said, $1.5 million. I was like, well, my dozen doors are worth like $6 million. I go, don't worry, you'll get there someday, buddy.
And the other thing about it is, like, isn't the point of doing real estate to some extent to make your life
easier?
Managing 120 doors, that's not like passive income. People say that's passive income. That's like that's probably harder than working a normal 9-to-5 job to manage.
Right. You're talking about my strategy, Rent by the Room, being management intensive. I mean, I couldn't imagine dealing with 100 roofs, 100 HVACs,
just
100
tenants.
Refrigerators, 100 tenants.
You're going to eviction court probably. I mean, it just sounds like a pain in the ass.
My strategy with just a sleek little portfolio, the numbers are bigger and it's more expensive. So maybe you have to wait a year in between purchasing properties, but you're done in a couple years anyway, and you're done with, like, I was thinking the other day, I've had so many repairs lately that I was thinking the other day, I just went through each of my properties and I was like, okay, the washer and dryer is new in all of those properties, so that probably can't go wrong. Okay, I put a new boiler in this property. I put a new HVAC in this property. It's like there's so many. They should change the term from how many doors do you own to how many roofs do you own, or how many HVACs do you own, or how many fridges do you own, because it is super high.
And also you can self-manage it, which people always forget. When you get a certain number of doors, you have to have management fees, but that's 10% of your income. Like, you can just shave that off because you can
so managing your 4 properties, right? What's your time spent on managing these?
During the pandemic, it's been a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has been like...
And under normal circumstances?
I don't know. When I retired, I quit my job in March of 2020, like the same day that things were locking down. So I don't know what real retirement was like.
Because you went from that pandemic craziness.
So I don't know what real retirement is like. I don't think was like the last 2 years. I don't think it's supposed to be. This is not how I envisioned it. Yeah. I envisioned it being something where once a day I'd have one little landlord task to do. Like, today's the day I'm going to meet the handyman and we're going to fix the leak in the shower. Or today's the day I'm going to meet Home Depot and we're going to put the flooring in, or whatever. Or today's the day I'm going to have an open house. I did not envision it being as management intensive as it has been during the pandemic, because there was a point where I had 12 vacancies all at once. There was, we're going to get into this later in a different podcast, but there was a lot of just, repairs and drama.
So in the next episode, we're really going to dig into the vacancy problem you had during COVID. Ron's had multiple fires at properties, right?
Fires, floods.
It makes it sound like you're setting them. Like it's some kind of insurance fraud.
Right. How many people have experienced a fire at one of their properties in their life? Ron's had multiple fires.
That really doesn't.
He's had floods, 5-foot floods, which we get videos of.
More than 5 feet.
So in the next episode,
it's like the plague.
The next episode, we'll talk to Ron about his other properties, which we haven't gotten. We only covered 2 of them here, and we're really going to talk about overcoming adversity,
right? And how to turn it around and turn it into a positive.
Because some of the stuff that's happened to Ron would push most people out of the real estate investing game. Nope, hasn't scared Ron off. He's learned how to deal with that, and we're going to talk about that in depth. And
like I said, make it a positive. Yeah. So again, if you're a person that uses the term "how many doors do you have," or equate your real estate portfolio by the number of doors, I want you to delete this podcast from your subscription feed. We don't want you. If Russell doesn't want you as a client,
God, at the end of this, Russell's going to have no clients. We're going to have no listeners by the end of this.
Also, back on the doors thing. The most common metric, right, is like $100 per door, right? Like, doesn't Brandon Turner or whatever always say, I want to make $100?
Yeah, I can't imagine what you make per property. It's thousands per property.
Right. Who would want
thousands per door?
Who would go through all this work again
to make $100?
To make $100, I want to make $3,000 or $4,000 per property. So that's what, and it's really not any harder, or So for me, like you were saying, it was, shouldn't life be easier? So for me, having a sleek, small, little, compact portfolio is easier.
So anyways, if anyone's out there wants to reach out to any of us, email any of us, me, Ron, or Jack, info@dcrealestatepodcast.com. Reach out to us on Instagram, subscribe, listen, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
We'll be at BPCon.
Thanks for listening to the DC Real Estate Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to contact the hosts, reach out to them at info@dcrealestatepodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you access your podcasts.